I was laying out plates in the kitchen when I heard laughter from the next room. My sisters were making plans, and my daughter joined in. Then I caught the words that changed how I saw the holiday. She can stay with the kids. She won't mind. They were talking about my daughter-in-law, 11 children, an entire Christmas handed to her without a choice. My name is Mary. I'm a mother, a listener, someone who thought family traditions would always hold steady, year after year. Please, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps these stories live on. The house always feels smaller once December comes, not because it is, but because every room fills too quickly, with coats piled on chairs, with shoes scattered by the door, with voices rising all at once until the walls seem to press inward. I've grown used to it over the years, but every Christmas season I notice the same thing. People fall into their places without much thought. My sisters busy themselves in the kitchen, my brothers hover near the drinks, the cousins run loose with children clinging to them, and then there's the quieter ones, the ones who get swept along, whether they want to or not. That morning, the house was already buzzing before the sun had set. The smell of cloves and roasted chicken carried down the hall, and the sound of children's footsteps thudded across the floor above. I was setting plates out on the long dining table when I heard my sisters start in on their list of tasks. "You'll do the desserts this year," one said. Her voice clipped but cheerful as she pushed tins across the counter. "I've already bought the drinks," another answered, pulling bottles from a bag and lining them up like trophies. It went on like that, each one naming something they would handle, their voices overlapping with easy rhythm. They'd done this dance so many times before it almost felt rehearsed. And then, like always, came the matter of the children. There were 11 this year. Too many for the parents to manage if they wanted to sit and enjoy themselves. Too many to leave scattered without someone watching. "They'll need someone steady," one of my sisters said, drying her hands on a towel. My daughter was leaning against the counter, her arms crossed. She didn't hesitate, not even a pause. "She can do it. She's young. She can handle it." She, of course, meant my daughter-in-law. The words landed with the same weight as a command, though no one called it that. There wasn't a question mark at the end of my daughter's sentence. There was no glance in my daughter-in-law's direction to check if she agreed. The decision sat there, solid, and the conversation flowed on around it like water around a stone. Heads nodded, someone laughed, another added a comment about how well she gets along with kids. And that was that. I stood by the table, placing forks beside each plate, and kept my eyes lowered. It wasn't my place to speak up just then, but I felt the moment slip into place, as it always did, sealing her role without her having said a single word. Across the room, she was working on a string of lights. The knots looked stubborn, wires looped over themselves. She smiled when one of the cousins asked her to pass the scissors. She nodded when told to fetch more hooks. Her hands moved quickly, but her voice stayed quiet. Twice she tried to say something, once about where to hang the garland, another time about the lights themselves, but both times someone spoke over her. Her words never carried far enough to matter. She didn't push. She didn't raise her voice or insist. She simply folded her thought back inside and kept moving. From a distance, she looked cheerful. She even laughed when one of the little ones tugged at her sleeve and asked for help reaching the banister. But I noticed the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. They stayed down, on the lights, on the hooks, on her hands. The planning circled on, voices rising, laughter spilling across the counter, and she remained at the edges, useful but not included. Later, when the decorating moved to the living room, the pattern didn't change. "Can you take the kids upstairs for a while? We'll be faster without them underfoot," one of the aunts called. "Here, hold this ladder steady," another said, not waiting for a reply. She obeyed, steadying the ladder as ornaments rattled above. She guided the children upstairs, sitting them in a circle with crayons and paper, keeping them busy while the rest of the room filled with chatter. I caught her glancing down the hall once or twice, as if listening for her name, but no one called her back. I've often thought about how easily roles are handed out in families. Some people speak, others nod. Some decide, others carry out the work. It happens without open debate, without much awareness. And once it starts, it rarely changes. My daughter has always had a strong voice. She takes after me in that way, direct, unbending. But where she claims space, her husband's wife seems to give it up. Perhaps not willingly, but out of habit. Over the years, I watched her slip into silence, offering help before it's asked, stepping back when decisions are made. And in this house, silence becomes permission. That evening, as the lights went up on the tree and the children shouted with delight, I sat on the sofa and watched the scene. She was crouched on the floor, tying a ribbon to a handmade ornament, helping one of the younger boys hang it low enough for him to reach. Her laughter sounded genuine, soft, and warm, yet faint compared to the chorus of voices above her. Around her, the adults debated dinner times, gift exchanges, travel schedules. Not once did anyone ask for her opinion. When she spoke, it was to a child or in response to a task. "She's good with kids," one cousin said approvingly, sipping wine. "She's patient," another added. "She's young," my daughter repeated, as if that settled all things. Their words passed over her head as though she weren't even present. She stayed bent over, helping tie knots, listening but never interrupting. I studied her face then, trying to read what she was thinking. If she felt frustrated, she didn't show it. If she wanted to protest, her lips never parted. She gave nothing away beyond that quiet smile, the kind people wear when they've grown used to not being asked. Later still, once the tree was lit and the children had run off again, I walked into the kitchen to refill a tray. She was there too, drying plates while one of my sisters chopped vegetables. "You don't have to do that," my sister told her lightly, though she didn't move to stop her. "It's fine," my daughter-in-law said, her voice low but polite. She stacked the plates carefully, as if the task was hers by right. I lingered at the doorway, listening to the way the conversation went on around her. My sisters spoke of menus, travel plans, even shared gossip about neighbors. She smiled when one of them looked her way, but she was never truly drawn in. The talk carried on, and she kept working quietly, invisible in plain sight. That night, after the last guest left, I sat by the window with the lights of the tree glowing behind me. I thought of what had been said earlier, about her handling the children, about how naturally the role had been placed upon her. I thought of how she'd stood there, smiling but silent, while decisions rolled past her. It struck me how quickly the pattern had formed, and how firmly it held. Every year she was given tasks no one else wanted. Every year she accepted them, at least on the surface. And every year the family grew more certain she would always agree. I wondered if she noticed, or if she'd noticed long ago and simply stopped trying. The next morning, the noise began again. Children racing down the hall, doors opening and closing, the kitchen filling with chatter. I found her in the corner of the living room, folding wrapping paper into neat squares, while two children played at her feet. "You don't need to save that," I told her gently. She looked up and smiled. "It feels wasteful to throw it all away." Her voice was calm, even kind, but her hands moved with a precision that suggested she'd been doing this sort of work her whole life. As the morning went on, more requests found her. Someone asked her to keep the children out of the kitchen. Someone else asked her to set out napkins. My daughter called from across the room, "Can you make sure the little ones don't touch the ornaments?" And every time she nodded. No hesitation, no argument, just quiet acceptance. I watched her closely, and though her smile stayed, I noticed the way her shoulders sank each time, just slightly, as if she were carrying a weight no one else saw. By the end of the day, I had no doubt what the family expected of her for the holiday ahead. It wasn't spoken again, but it didn't need to be. The decision had been made, casually, without her input, and sealed by silence. She would be the one to watch the children. She would keep them entertained, keep them fed, keep them safe, while the rest of the family sat down to relax. And she, as always, would smile and let it happen. When I heard my daughter say it, "She can do it. She's young. She can handle it," I knew the words weren't new. They weren't careless. Not really. They were the same words we had leaned on for years. I could almost trace them through time, back to other Christmases, other gatherings, other moments when her place in the family seemed set before she even stepped into the room. It was too easy to pretend this was the first time, but it wasn't, not even close. One memory stays with me most clearly. It was 5 Christmases ago, though it feels closer, as though it had happened only last winter. The dining room that year was filled with warmth, candles flickering in the windows, the long table covered with bowls and platters, steam rising into the air, the sound of forks against plates, voices calling across the table, laughter loud enough to shake the glasses. And then in the hallway just outside, silence of a different kind, a baby crying, soft but constant, and her, my daughter-in-law, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, rocking gently, her arms wrapped around the little one. Her hair had come loose from its clip, strands falling over her cheek as she whispered words meant to soothe. I remember pausing in the doorway, holding my plate. She looked up, caught my eye, and offered a smile. Not one of complaint, not even of exhaustion, but the small, polite smile of someone who doesn't want to be asked how she feels. Inside the dining room, glasses clinked as someone made a toast. I stepped back toward the warmth, and she stayed where she was, in the quiet, rocking. Her plate never left the counter. She never joined the meal. Another year. 2 winters later, the living room had been torn apart by excitement. Children squealing, wrapping paper flying, ribbons tossed onto the floor, and curls. Adults watched, clapped, snapped pictures, comparing gifts and laughing at surprises. It was the brightest part of the night, the moment everyone remembered. Except she wasn't in the room. I found her in the kitchen, her sleeves pushed up, water running steady over stacks of plates. The sink foamed with soap as she scraped food into the bin, her movements quick and practiced. She hummed under her breath, though I could tell she wasn't listening to the sound. "You should be in there," I said, stepping in, almost scolding. She shook her head lightly, kept scrubbing. "It's fine. I'll join in after." But by the time she dried her hands, the gifts had all been opened, the paper bagged, the moment over. Her chair in the living room sat untouched, her name uncalled when people showed off their presents. I saw it then, too, the way she smiled as though nothing was wrong, the way she returned to the room as if she hadn't missed anything at all. There were other gatherings, too. A summer barbecue where the children grew restless and wild, chasing each other around the yard until the adults grew impatient. Someone had to calm them, keep them safe near the steps, find them water. She was the one who stood, setting down her drink without being asked, and spent the rest of the evening crouched in the grass, her skirt streaked green, her glass of iced tea left sweating on the porch. A birthday party, where cake crumbs and spilled drinks spread across the tablecloth. While the others clapped for the birthday song, she had already moved into the kitchen with a rag and sponge. By the time the candles were blown out, she was bent over the counter, scrubbing. And no one stopped her. No one thought to. Looking back, I can't deny that I saw it happening. I saw her step into the gaps again and again. At first, I told myself she was simply helpful, that she preferred it. She was calm, steady, good with children, good with order. I thought maybe it gave her comfort. Maybe she liked being useful. But as the years went on, I began to notice the other side. The way she hovered at the edge of the group, waiting for someone else to speak first. The way her laughter softened when louder voices took over. The way she accepted requests as if they were facts, never questioned, never challenged. And I realized it wasn't that she wanted these roles, it was that no one else stepped forward, and she had grown too quiet to refuse. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular. The meal was nearly ready, the table crowded with food. She carried a heavy dish into the dining room, her arms straining, while the others sat and chatted. She set it down, dusted her hands, then turned to leave the room. "Sit," I told her. "Stay." But she only smiled, shook her head, and disappeared back into the kitchen. Later, when the dishes were stacked and the counters wiped, she joined us for dessert, her face bright, her laughter light, but I could see the tired lines under her eyes, the way she pressed her hands together to hide the redness of her skin from washing so long. I ask myself now why I never said more. Why I never insisted she leave the dishes, come to the table, take her place among us. At the time, I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself she didn't seem unhappy. She never complained, she never asked for help. But silence can be a mask, and I should have known that better than anyone, because I wore it myself once. In my early years as a wife, when my own voice was smaller than it is now, I too took on tasks I never asked for. I too slipped out of rooms to clean up while others laughed. The difference was, over time, I hardened into someone who pushed back. She hadn't, not yet. And so the pattern continued, year after year, shaping itself around her. This Christmas, as I watched her untangle lights and accept tasks without question, those memories layered over the present. I saw her rocking the baby while we toasted. I saw her scraping dishes while we opened gifts. I saw her crouched in the grass with children tugging at her sleeves while adults played cards. It was too familiar, too sharp. And I couldn't tell myself anymore that it was chance or that she wanted it that way. It was a pattern we had all allowed to settle in. And once it had settled, it grew invisible to everyone but her. I can't say exactly when my guilt began, but it was there, sitting in the pit of my chest that evening. Not sharp, not overwhelming, but steady, like a weight I hadn't noticed before. I had let her slip into silence, watched it happen year after year, and told myself it was normal. Maybe she had accepted it. Maybe she had learned not to expect different. But I knew better. I knew the look in her eyes when she glanced down a hallway, listening for her name, but never hearing it. I knew the way her smile sometimes faded the second no one was looking. And I knew she deserved more than to be given the children year after year, as though her youth and patience made her invisible to the rest of us. That night, after the house had quieted and the lights of the tree glowed in the dark, I sat awake longer than I should have. I thought of those moments from the past, each one sharper than the last. I thought of the hallway with the crying baby, the kitchen with the dishes, the summer grass, the birthday cake, and I thought of her, my daughter-in-law, smiling through it all, never raising her voice, never saying no. I asked myself why I had never stepped in, why I had let the years pass in silence. And the truth is, it was easier. Easier to believe she didn't mind. Easier to tell myself it was her choice. Easier to stay with the crowd than to question it. But this Christmas, I could feel it. The moment shifting. Something in her posture, in the quiet way she moved, told me she was no longer willing to let the pattern continue. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen when she finally decided to break it. I have always thought of my daughter-in-law as steady, a woman who carried her silence like a kind of armor. She nodded when told what to do, smiled when asked to help, faded into the background when the rest of the room grew too loud. For years, I believed that steadiness meant she had accepted her place. But that winter, something in her shifted. I didn't notice it at first, not until the house quieted and the crowd dispersed. Only then did I catch the small details, the signs that this year might not unfold the way the others had. During the day, she seemed much the same. She untangled strings of lights, steadied ladders, answered when spoken to. She moved among the children easily, keeping them occupied with crayons and games. To anyone else, she must have looked unchanged, helpful, patient, exactly what was expected of her. But I was watching closely this time, and I saw the difference. Her smile was lighter, not so practiced, as if it didn't need to convince anyone. Her eyes didn't drop to the floor when spoken over, they drifted instead, looking past the person, out the window, somewhere farther away. And though she nodded, though she accepted the tasks handed to her, there was no weight behind it. It was agreement in form only, not in spirit. That evening, after dinner dishes had been cleared and the house had gone still, I walked down the hall to fetch my shawl. Passing by the guest room, I caught sight of her through the half-open door. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the light from her phone casting her face in a soft glow. The children were asleep, the house dark, but her eyes were bright, focused. I paused quietly, unseen, and noticed the images on her screen. A cabin in the woods, snow piled on the roof, a fire glowing through a window. Another photo, a wide porch with rocking chairs, the sky pink with sunset. She scrolled slowly, her lips curved into a faint smile. Not the polite smile she wore when spoken to, not the careful mask she carried through the day, but something different, something lighter, almost private. I stood there longer than I should have, the thought forming slowly in my mind. She wasn't simply browsing, she was planning. The next morning, I tested my suspicion, though I didn't mean to. Over tea, I asked casually about her evening. "Did you sleep well?" I said. She looked up, startled for just a moment, then smiled. Yes, the quiet helped. Her words were simple, her voice even, but I caught the flicker in her eyes, as though she carried a secret just beneath the surface. Later, as she poured juice for the children, she asked me polite questions about the holiday schedule, what time dinner would be served, when guests usually left, what day the family gift exchange would happen. She listened intently, nodding, her hands steady on the glasses. But her gaze told me she wasn't asking to prepare. She was measuring, weighing, fitting her own plan around our traditions. That afternoon, while the house filled again with noise, I caught her by the window, her phone in her hand, her face turned toward the falling snow outside. She tapped the screen quickly, then slid it into her pocket as someone entered the room. Her smile returned at once, polite and light, as though nothing had happened. But I had seen enough. For years, she had moved with us, never against us. She bent where the family pushed, absorbed what was handed to her, and never raised her voice in protest. But this time, she wasn't resisting. She was stepping aside, quietly, calmly, without drawing attention. She wasn't fighting the plan. She was making one of her own. That evening, the house felt especially full, laughter rising from the dining room, children tumbling into the hall. My daughter and sisters talked loudly about shopping lists, about recipes, about how busy the next days would be. And there she was again, at the edge of the room, folding napkins into neat triangles. She nodded, answered briefly when spoken to, smiled at the right moments. But her eyes, they were elsewhere. I wondered if anyone else noticed. I doubted it. To the rest of the family, she looked exactly the same, helpful, agreeable, dependable, the one they could trust to keep the children entertained while the adults enjoyed themselves. But I saw it clearly now. She wasn't really here anymore. Not fully. A part of her was already gone, sitting by a fire in some quiet cabin, watching the snow fall in peace. That night, as I passed the guest room again, I slowed without meaning to. The door was nearly closed this time, but I caught a glimpse of her silhouette against the glow of her phone. She moved with intention now, fingers typing quickly, pausing, typing again. Her head tilted slightly, the faintest smile on her lips. It wasn't idle scrolling. It was planning. I stood there in the hall, my hand on the railing, and felt a quiet certainty settle in me. She was going to leave. Not forever, not dramatically, but for herself. She would step away from the noise, the demands, the endless tasks, and she wouldn't ask permission. She didn't need to. The next day, she was more careful. She tucked her phone away whenever someone came close, smiled readily when given another errand. She kept the children busy with crafts at the table, her laughter blending easily with theirs. To anyone watching, she was the same as ever. But once you knew what to look for, it was impossible not to see it. Her patience wasn't submission. Her quiet wasn't surrender. It was distance. For years, I had told myself she didn't mind, that she was content in the background. But as I watched her move through the rooms, smiling faintly, her eyes always carrying that far-off look, I understood the truth. She hadn't spoken up because she didn't need to. She had already made her choice, and when the moment came, she would slip away without fuss, leaving the rest of us to wonder when we had lost her.
Christmas Eve has always been the loudest night in our house. By early afternoon, the kitchen was already crowded, the oven running steady, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat and cinnamon. Children's voices bounced from wall to wall as they chased each other through the halls. Doors opened and closed, laughter carried from one room to the next. It was the kind of chaos that felt normal to us, woven into the rhythm of the season. People spoke over one another, handed out instructions, assumed things would fall into place the way they always had. And at the center of it all, without question, was supposed to be her. I heard my sisters talk about it as if it were fact. She'll take them outside after dinner, give the rest of us a break. She's good with them, one of the cousins said. She's used to it, another added. No one asked her. No one even looked for her. They assumed she would appear, stepping forward at the right time, gathering the children into a circle, settling the noise so the rest of us could breathe. But when the hour came and the children grew restless, no one stepped in. And she wasn't there. At first I thought she was upstairs. I expected her to appear at any moment, balancing crayons and paper, or calling the children into the den. I moved through the rooms, half listening, waiting for her voice. But the hallway was empty. The guest room door stood open. Inside, the bed was neatly made, the pillows fluffed. I scanned the room and stopped short. The corner where her suitcase had sat since her arrival was bare. I opened the closet door. Empty. The small pile of folded clothes on the chair was gone. A strange stillness passed through me. I walked to the window and looked down at the driveway. The car that had been parked at the edge since she'd arrived was no longer there. The space was empty, the gravel damp where tires had pressed. She was gone. I stood at the window longer than I should have, the noise of the house swelling behind me. The children's voices rose, the kitchen clattered with pans, laughter spilled through the walls. No one else seemed to notice. Not yet. When I stepped back into the hall, one of my sisters called from the kitchen. "Where's she gone off to? The little ones are getting wild." I didn't answer. Another voice, sharper from the dining room. "She should be with the children by now. Did anyone see her?" Still I stayed quiet. It didn't take long for the questions to ripple through the house. Is she upstairs? Maybe she went to the store. She wouldn't leave without saying something, would she? People drifted from room to room, searching as if she might suddenly appear, as if she were simply misplaced like a set of keys. But each door opened to the same emptiness. She must be around, my daughter said, her voice rising with impatience. She wouldn't just walk off. But when she saw the guest room, when she noticed the missing suitcase, the truth began to settle in. The children grew louder, running in circles, their shouts piercing through the air. My sisters clapped their hands, calling for order, but it only made the noise sharper. She's supposed to handle this, one muttered under her breath. I stood near the staircase, watching the confusion spread. They asked questions into the air, half to each other, half to themselves. Where is she? Why would she leave? Did anyone see her go? But I didn't join in. I kept my hands folded in front of me, my mouth closed, because I knew. I thought of her faint smile as she scrolled through cabins on her phone. I thought of her quiet questions about schedules, her eyes always distant. I thought of the way she folded napkins the night before, present in body but not in spirit. She hadn't vanished without thought. She had chosen her moment. While the house turned inward, caught up in its noise, she had slipped out quietly, carrying only what was hers. And for the first time, she was free of the role they had written for her. The confusion in the house deepened. My daughter's voice grew sharp. This isn't like her. She's never left before. She should have told us, one of my sisters said. She'll be back, another added quickly, as if saying it aloud would make it true. I listened to them circle around the absence, unwilling to name it for what it was. They wanted to believe she would return, step back into her place, gather the children, soothe the chaos. But I stayed silent, not because I didn't know the answer, but because for the first time, I didn't want to give her away. The noise of the children filled the house unchecked. Adults tried to corral them, with little success. The dining room grew restless, the kitchen more frantic. People whispered about her, about where she had gone, about when she would return. And I stood at the edge of it all, my heart strangely calm. For years, I had watched her slip into silence, into service, into a role no one else wanted. For years, I had excused it, told myself it was fine, told myself it was her choice. Now, watching the family stumble without her, I realized she had made a choice after all, one that no one expected. She had chosen herself. The house carried on, louder, messier, unsettled. People asked questions, but answers came none. And I let the silence hang, protective, almost proud, because I knew she was gone to a place where no one would hand her the children, no one would talk over her, no one would measure her worth by her patience. She had slipped away into her own life, leaving us to manage without her. And though the family called her name, I did not join them. I let her absence stand. The night did not unravel all at once. It frayed slowly, strand by strand, until the whole house felt like it was splitting apart. At first, no one wanted to admit it. My sisters and cousins kept insisting she would walk back through the door. One of them even set aside a chair at the corner of the dining table, certain she'd return in time for dinner. They held on to that hope, while the children grew restless, their voices rising until they bounced from wall to wall like a storm inside the house. I could see it coming, the unraveling, but I didn't step in. I stayed in the doorway, listening, watching. The children's games turned wild. They chased each other down the hall, knocking into walls, tripping over shoes scattered on the floor. A vase wobbled on a table when one boy brushed past too quickly. Another child screamed when his toy was snatched away, and the sound pierced through the noise like glass shattering. My sisters rushed to corral them, but the children slipped through their hands. They weren't used to stepping in this way. They weren't used to being the ones responsible.
The kitchen grew louder, the clatter of pans mixing with raised voices. We can't cook and watch them at the same time. It's impossible. A cousin barked orders, trying to sound firm, but his voice cracked when a toddler darted past him with a fistful of cookies. Another cousin tried bribing the older ones with candy, but the moment the wrappers crinkled, the younger children cried for more, their little fists pounding on the table. What was supposed to be a holiday dinner turned into a scramble. Food half prepared, counters sticky, children everywhere. The rhythm that had always depended on her was gone. My daughter's frustration rose above it all. She stormed into the dining room, her voice sharp, cutting through the noise. She abandoned us. Do you hear me? She walked out and left us with this mess on Christmas Eve.
Her cheeks were flushed, her fists clenched at her sides. She wanted someone to argue back, to match her anger, to tell her she was right. But the room gave her nothing. My sisters were too busy chasing children who wouldn't listen. The cousins were already shouting at each other about whose job it was to set the table. Her words hung in the air, unchallenged but unanswered. I stayed where I was, near the staircase, my hands folded in front of me. I could have spoken, but I didn't, because as the voices tangled, as the house shook with noise, another picture filled my mind. A cabin, tucked away far from here. Snow pressing against the windows, the silence of the woods holding everything still. A fire glowing in the hearth, steady and low. I could almost hear the sound of logs crackling, almost feel the warmth spreading through the room. And in that cabin, I imagined her, my daughter-in-law, sitting quietly in a chair, wrapped in a blanket, her face softened by calm, not rushing, not answering demands, not folding herself into the edges of someone else's celebration, just breathing, just resting, just existing without being pulled apart by the weight of others' needs. The contrast was so sharp that I nearly smiled, though the house around me was in chaos. The longer she stayed gone, the more the family began to turn on itself. "She's selfish," one cousin muttered as he tried to separate two children fighting over a toy. "She should have said something," an aunt snapped while pulling a crying child onto her lap. "She's ruined dinner," my daughter declared, her voice trembling with more than anger. But none of them could deny the truth. They weren't prepared for this. They had built the whole night on her shoulders, and without her, the structure collapsed. Plates went unwashed, food burned on the stove, gifts were left unopened as children's cries swallowed the house. No one sat at the table together. No one sang the carols my sisters always insisted on. The traditions they prized slipped through their hands because the one person they had counted on to hold them together was gone. I leaned against the wall, letting the noise wash over me, and I thought again of the cabin. I pictured the snow outside, thick and heavy, softening every sound. I pictured the fire, low and steady, the air warm and still. She had chosen that. She had stepped away from this storm and into quiet. For the first time, I wondered what it must feel like to choose yourself over tradition, over family expectation, over the endless demands that pile on without thanks, to choose silence over noise, calm over chaos. The house struggled deep into the night. My daughter paced the rooms, muttering about disrespect and duty. The cousins bickered over whose turn it was to entertain the children. Aunts snapped at each other in the kitchen, tension spilling over with every clatter of a pan. But through it all, I felt something different. Not anger, not disappointment. A quiet understanding. Because while they fought, while they scrambled, while they called her name in irritation, I knew she was out there in the snow, far from the storm, sitting by a fire that asked nothing of her, and I could not call her wrong for it. That night, the house carried on, loud and restless, pulling itself in circles. But inside me, there was stillness,
because she had shown us something we had refused to see. She had chosen her own peace, and though the family raged, though the children screamed, though the house bent under the weight of its own expectations, I could not bring myself to condemn her. I only stood in the quiet corner of it all, imagining the glow of that cabin, the snow pressing against the windows, and the calm she had finally claimed for herself. The house felt different the morning after. Not empty, but unsettled. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from exhaustion. Children moved slower, their steps dragging on the stairs. My sisters shuffled around the kitchen, voices low, their hands heavy as they reached for pots and plates. Even the usual clatter of breakfast seemed muted. And yet, beneath all of it, my mind was not here. It was turning over memories, one after another, pulling me back through years I had ignored. I saw her again in the hallway from years past, holding a crying baby close to her chest, while the rest of us sat laughing around a long table. The sound of our glasses clinking had filled the dining room. Music played faintly in the background. We had leaned into our plates, telling stories, catching up, enjoying one another, and she had been outside of it all, rocking back and forth, her cheek pressed against the child's hair, her body swaying with patience. She hadn't complained. She hadn't asked for someone to take the child. She had simply carried the moment, and in doing so, carried the weight no one else wanted. At the time, I had only noticed briefly. I told myself she was good with children, that maybe she preferred it that way. And then I turned back to the laughter, letting the moment pass. Another year came back to me. The kitchen smelled of pine and cinnamon. The living room was a mess of torn wrapping paper. Children squealed as gifts were unwrapped. My sisters clapped as they revealed scarves, sweaters, perfumes. And where was she? Not in the circle, not opening her own gift, not laughing with the others. She was at the sink, scraping plates into the trash, sleeves rolled up, water running hot as she washed and stacked. Her face turned slightly toward the noise, but she didn't step into it. I saw her then, too. I could have walked in and taken the dish from her hands. I could have called her into the room, but I didn't. I told myself it was fine. I told myself someone had to do it. And, again, I turned away. It wasn't only those 2 moments. Once you look back clearly, you begin to see how many times it happened. The way she was always the one to rise first when a baby cried, the one to sit on the floor when the children grew restless, the one to refill glasses, to clear plates, to fold blankets at the end of the night. She slipped into that role so quietly that the rest of us grew used to it. We told ourselves it was natural. We told ourselves she was willing. But the truth is simpler and harder. She was taken for granted. Sitting in the stillness of that morning, I felt the weight of my own silence. I had seen enough to know. I had watched her drift to the edges of celebration year after year, and I had not stepped forward. I had not said, "This is too much. This is not fair." Instead, I told myself stories to make the silence easier, that it was her choice, that it was tradition, that every family had someone who carried the load. But all those stories were excuses. I thought of her faint smile the night before, her eyes on the glow of her phone screen as she looked at cabins in the snow. I had not asked her what she planned, but I had seen the way her lips curved upward, the way her gaze drifted far beyond the walls of our house. And then, when the suitcase disappeared, when the car was gone, I understood. She hadn't left in anger. She hadn't stormed out, slamming doors, shouting accusations. She had slipped away quietly, the same way she had lived among us, softly, without demand, without protest.
But this time, the silence belonged to her. I could almost picture her waking that morning, not to the sound of children crying or relatives calling her name, but to snow pressing against the window. I could picture her wrapped in a blanket near a fire, the kind of warmth that doesn't demand anything. It wasn't selfish. It was survival. As I watched my sisters shuffle through the kitchen and my daughter sulk at the table, regret pressed against me. Not sharp, not loud, just steady. I should have defended her. The words repeated, slow and heavy. I should have said something years ago, when I first saw her standing alone in the hallway. I should have spoken when she was bent over the sink, sleeves wet from dishwater, while the rest of us unwrapped gifts. I could have lifted the burden before it grew this heavy. I could have told my family she deserved the same place at the table, the same chance to laugh, the same joy in the moment. But I stayed quiet. And because I stayed quiet, she had no reason to believe anything would ever change. That was the part that struck deepest. She hadn't walked away from one night. She had walked away from years of being unseen. And in truth, she hadn't abandoned us first. I sat with that thought, letting it settle, because it was the truth I had avoided for too long. She had given us so much, quietly, without asking for thanks, and we had repaid her with assumption, with silence, with the belief that she would always be there when needed. Now she was gone, and for the first time, the family felt what it was like without her. The house that morning was restless. My daughters sighed heavily at the table, muttering about ungratefulness. My sisters moved in and out of the kitchen, avoiding each other's eyes. Children picked at their food, listless and bored. But beneath all of that, I felt something shift inside me. A recognition. She had not chosen wrong. She had simply chosen herself. And maybe that was the bravest choice of all. The day drifted on, slower than most Christmas mornings. There was no rhythm, no smooth flow of tradition. The family moved like they were still waking from a bad dream. Children tugged at toys half-heartedly, their usual laughter faint. My sisters tried to keep the meals moving, but the food lost its place in the noise. My daughter stayed sharp-tongued, muttering whenever her eyes fell on the empty chair at the table. And me? I stayed quiet, my mind somewhere else entirely. I thought of the woods. I thought of the cabin I had imagined so clearly the night before. Snow piling against the window, pressing soft white against the glass. A fire glowing steady in the hearth. And her, my daughter-in-law, sitting there in the quiet, not asked to rise, not asked to soothe, not asked to serve. Her body still, her mind at rest. The picture grew so vivid that it felt more real to me than the restless house around me. As my daughter snapped at her cousins, as my sisters argued about the meal, I let the image of her in peace carry me. And then it struck me. Maybe this was how it always should have been. Not her drowning in the noise while the rest of us leaned on her silence. Not her folded away in corners, carrying a weight no one thanked her for. Maybe it took walking away for her to find what none of us ever offered her. I couldn't call it wrong. I couldn't call it selfish. For the first time, I saw it as something else. Strength. Strength to step out of the pattern, to choose her own rest, to take back the holiday in her own way. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the house fade to the background. I could almost hear the crunch of snow under her boots, the creak of a cabin door, the hush that follows when you sit by a fire alone. And instead of anger, I felt something else rise in me, gratitude, because she had shown me what I had refused to see, that peace is not given, it is chosen.
that if no one else will defend your place at the table, you must claim it yourself. The house shook with noise and anger, but somewhere out in the woods, she sat in peace. I couldn't blame her. This year, she finally chose herself, and maybe that's what she needed all along. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. I watched it from the window, the flakes drifting silently down, covering the ground, smoothing the rough edges of the world. The noise of the house carried on behind me, but I let the snowfall fill my vision. For the first time that season, I felt calm.